Well, now it is time to discuss this week's political news. Joining me now live from Canberra is Ebony Bennett from the Australia Institute. Ebony, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining me.
G'day, thanks for having me.
Look, the coronavirus, as we know, has really dominated discussion in Australia and overseas this week, and there are predictions that Australia could be one of the worst countries affected economically by this outbreak. The federal government unveiled a stimulus package. How important is it, Ebony, that the government gets this right, particularly for businesses and jobs?
It's incredibly important, and the next couple of months are going to be a period of really high danger politically and economically for the government and for Australia. So Treasury officials warned in estimates this week that combined with the impact of the bushfires, the impact of coronavirus together are expected to be about a 0.7% hit to GDP, and potentially with a much worse outlook in the short to medium term as well. So the stimulus package is incredibly important, and after rubbishing Labor for overspending on its stimulus, I think the real risk here is that the government will undercook it, and I think there'd be hell to pay economically and politically if the coalition was the first government in 30 odd years to preside over a recession. So that's the danger for the danger for Australians, is both coronavirus and potentially an economic downturn that could see people out of a job.
The IMF has already called for the government to delay delivering a surplus. Do you think that that should be a consideration?
It absolutely should. The economy has been sluggish for quite some time now. The IMF also warned about Australia's relatively high levels of unemployment and underemployment, and that's of course how most people feel the impacts of a recession, by losing their job. Really, Shane Wright, I think, pointed out this morning that's where the impact is felt most. 1% increase in unemployment could lead to up to 100,000 people losing their jobs. That's what the government will be worried about. And so when it's thinking about its stimulus package, quite apart from abandoning the surplus as the IMF has advised this week, they're thinking about targeting business, but the concern is if they don't also look at households, that stimulus might the mask and not do enough to stimulate growth in the economy. So protecting people's jobs is one of the big considerations, but there's no use giving business a stimulus package if the consumers aren't there to buy their products, and that's the concern with underemployment and with record slow wages growth.
I think, Ebony, it's safe to say this week we've also seen some of the worst behaviour come out, particularly over the toilet paper saga of sorts. You know, we saw that incident, here it is, at the shopping centre yesterday, you know, people being violent with one another over this. I mean, what do you make of it?
Well, you know, here in Canberra, I've been twice to Woolies this week and haven't been able to buy any toilet paper myself, so down to my last couple of rolls. But I think it is human nature to panic, but on the other hand, I'm concerned that this is, you know, almost the opposite of the behaviour that we saw during the bushfire crisis, where everyone was really able to come together. We gave what we could, both, you know, in terms of cash donations, but also in terms of goods to people who had lost everything. And you know, I guess it's the difference between something where you're expected to self-isolate perhaps makes people panic that little bit more, to be a little bit more selfish. But I think the footage of all of that panic buying probably leads a lot of people like myself to think, oh geez, how many toilet rolls do I have left?
Yes.
And head to the supermarket. So it's sort of a little bit of a vicious cycle there.
It is, and that vision is obviously, you know, it's crazy. Crazy to think that this is what has gone on the last week. Ebony, on another matter, Scott Morrison is facing new questions over the sports rorts affair after former Cabinet Minister Bridget McKenzie, she this week issued a statement denying that she'd made last-minute changes to a list of grants. You and I have been speaking about this on this program for the last couple of weeks. Is this just another example, I guess, that this situation is not going anywhere for the Prime Minister?
No, I don't think it is going anywhere, and I thought it was extraordinary this week that he sought just to avoid questions on it altogether. I don't think that will last, but you know, there are real constitutional and legal questions now hanging over this program, and the potential that $100 million of taxpayers' money was spent illegally as well as, you know, unethically. Putting aside the fact that they've you know, spent this money in places where it was electorally advantageous instead of giving them to sports clubs that had the merit in their proposals, there are now huge questions not only on who was making the decisions at what time, but when those decisions were made during caretaker period, and whether or not this money was spent actually with no legal basis. So huge questions to answer here, and it's really not good enough for the Prime Minister just to refuse to answer questions from the media about it, because there is real wrongdoing here, and it's important to the bottom of it. Otherwise, taxpayers will have no confidence that they're spending, taxpayers' money, our taxes, in ways that are going to benefit the public instead of the coalition.
Ebony, domestic violence, of course, has been in the spotlight over the last couple of weeks. Today, the federal government announced it's setting aside around $20 million for interest-free loans to help women escape abusive partners. It's around up to $2,000 to help cover various costs. Do you think that goes far enough?
Well, it's certainly a welcome announcement, and financial abuse is often part and parcel of domestic abuse, and partners will cut off women's credit cards and limit the amount that they can spend, and often women are fleeing with virtually no money to their name. They have to find somewhere new to live, often can't take a lot of things with them, so there are huge financial costs associating a dangerous and violent relationship that people often don't think about. So I think it's a really welcome program, but given the government's track record of removing funding for a different program that provided women with a free smartphone to escape a relationship, they've defunded the peak body for Aboriginal survivors of domestic abuse and violence. So they've got a very patchy track record here. And much like the government always says that business requires certainty to be able to plan for the future, I don't think we're going to make a real impact on helping women and preventing the scourge of domestic violence unless programs like this are guaranteed to have long-term funding certainty. So it's no good to announce $20 million today and then find that it's cut back in future budgets to come. So I think it's a really welcome program, and I hope it will do a lot of good, but I hope that it survives in the long term where so many other government programs have been.
Yeah, absolutely. Fingers crossed. All right, Ebony Bennett, appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon.
Thank you.